All right. We're live here at my channel. Thank you all for coming. Today we're going to be talking about music practice and some of the specific things that you can do to get better. I was looking on YouTube and I saw this video of a guy that it showed practicing for 1 year, something like 700 plus hours, and so I immediately was intrigued to see what kind of progress you could even make with 1 year. When I started, I didn't practice near that much. I was a little child, and I didn't log near that many hours. And it's been so long, I don't even remember what I accomplished in a year. But his name is Brandon Hawksley. I think I'm saying that right, Hawksley. And Brandon, I came across your video. I thought it was great. Why don't you start out before we dig into some of the more particulars? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so I'm Brandon Hawksley, and I suppose the most thing I'd be known for is on the YouTube progress video, the 1 year progress video. So I started playing the piano in June 2017. So it's been over 2.5 years. It will be 3 years in June of this month, 2020. And I quickly found myself gravitating towards the piano. And I'm now studying music at university, performance and just academically as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I have to say it's unusual for an adult to just kind of figure out in such little time that what their passion is and what they want to pursue. At what point did you know this is what I want to do?
Yeah, you're right. It I think when I started to get about 5 or 6 months in, I knew I wanted to go to university because I didn't go when I was just straight out of college, or maybe in America it's like not high school. What would it be? Before university in America.
Yeah.
It's like those years where you're 18. But I was working as a personal trainer, and when I got into the piano, it was around the same time I was thinking about going to university to study. But I knew I didn't really want to study sports science or anything like that. And music kind of came around that same time that I started to improve and think, what if I tried to study music academically? And it was my friends actually that I met through when I used to work at a gym that were musicians that encouraged me to just give it a go. And so I applied to a couple of universities in the UK with not much expectation, but managed to get an offer from one or two. And that's how I managed to do it.
Very nice. So when I saw your video, you went from playing some very basic things to, at the end of the video, playing the famous Impromptu by Chopin. Not a 1 year piece. Um, I not at all. I mean, of course, I started much younger, and my practice times were maybe 30 minutes a day, and so in 10 years, maybe eight. I don't remember. I started playing the Left Hand Etude by Chopin, also pretty good monster of a piece, but it took me a long time to even get to that point. Obviously, if you're going to accomplish something like that, you didn't do it by doing nothing. What did your day to day look like in terms of practice? I know we have, some people that are devoted, but they're working and may not have as much on the time end of things. Can you tell us what your practice day to day was like how much and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think the biggest misconception on that video as well is that it was people were doing the maths. It's because I put 700 plus hours because I don't truly know how many hours total of the year it was. But I knew that it was at least 2 hours every day on average. And to be honest, most days it would have been like three. So it was a lot of hours in the year, but I think it was the combination of just smart practice and really paying attention from the very beginning. So I was trying my best to watch videos online before I even got the piano. I was researching how to do C major scales. Like one of the main things, even sorry,
That's all right. You were saying about C major scale.
yeah, it was just things like just online. How can you do the C major scale on the first day? But well, you watch a video and do it. But you're right. For most people, it's a big shock, and for me, I think it was around the time that I got to 5 or 6 months when I realized that maybe it wasn't just putting the hours in. I was definitely, I don't like to say gifted, but natural aptitude for it for sure. And once I kind of realized that people weren't making the same kind of progress in the year that I was really committed. But I also had everything working in my favor. So I was self-employed. I had the financial ability to buy a digital piano. I had the free time to practice those many hours. People that are working a 9 to 5 can't.
Right.
So it was a mixture of the effort put in, natural talent, and also all the facilities to make it work, all kind of combining into one to make it happen. So it wasn't just kind of like poof out of nowhere. I'm playing fantasy impromptu.
Yeah.
The fantasy impromptu was, I think, to be honest, it was a stretch, but I think when I got to like the 10th month, I really believed I could learn it because of the repetition. So the difficulty technically was there, but because there's a lot of repeated parts, it didn't require so much learning overall music on my part. So I wanted to kind of stretch myself just to see if I could do it as a challenge for me, and to kind of, showcase, like I had seen on adult progress videos, what could be done in a year's time, and just mainly to try and motivate others. Though it worked both ways. In the YouTube comments, that people would argue back and forth about, is it encouraging or is it more discouraging? Because people think eventually that I'm selling it as this is what you will be able to do after 1 year. But I think the overall message is more, look what can be done as an adult learner in the best possible scenario, and there's nothing stopping you from making some great progress as well.
Well, at my studio, when I'm teaching, I focus a lot on methodology, and so I want to get into some specifics with you because I'm sure you ask 10 different players, you'll get some different answers on this, but I would wager you would also get a lot of the same sorts of answers. But I'm curious, um, do you have specific methods that you feel like have made you a better player faster?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would attribute my progress as well to being quite smart about how I practice. So I was literally like a sponge and trying to get as much knowledge as I could off of online resources and also from teachers. But I'd say that most of my progress has been through self-teaching, using the online resources available on like YouTube, honestly, because there's so much out there. I'd say the key, there's many, but the first one I'd say is just practicing with intentions in mind. Like, it's so easy to practice for an hour and then completely lose sight of what you're really doing and just kind of hit your head against the wall for an hour when you get stuck on something and you just think that repetition is going to fix it, just doing it over and over again. But you have to take a step back, almost like walk back from the wall and analyze why am I struggling with this? What's the issue? Which is easier said than done, but I do that a lot on day-to-day practice. If I'm finding myself struggling with a certain section of music, I'll ask like what's the issue, and then try and isolate those things and just work on those. Obviously, slow practice, and most of the time when I'm learning new pieces, not playing it to tempo for a while, and just practicing the kind of the difficulties of the piece. For example, right now I'm learning the G minor prelude by Rachmaninoff, and that is the difficulty with that. I'd say would be the jumps, like moving your hand quickly across the keyboard.
Mm.
So when you hear the pa pa pa, you don't really have to practice that. All you have to do is practice the jumps. So when I'd be practicing it, I wouldn't do the pa pa pum repetition. I just go. I would just be practicing moving my hand to the position that I needed to be in, and not practicing the pa pa pum. So just things like that.
Makes a
And
lot of
also
sense.
analyze. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, one of the things that I talk with my students with is being very specific with the sections that you practice. And I also talk a lot about the size of the section. And one of the ways that I explain it, and I think you're kind of going along the same line, is that sometimes if the piece is very difficult, I might be working in less than a measure of music at a time, maybe half a measure, or in some cases, like if there's a big jump, one of the things that I focus a lot on is being able to do that jump without looking at my hands. And not necessarily perfectly, but I spend a lot of time either looking at the music or with my eyes closed. And so I might sit there and do that jump only the jump, just basically two fractions of a beat, hundreds of times before moving on. Is that kind of what you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. The eyes closed thing is an interesting one, because I
Mm,
tried that fairly recently, where you have a piece memorized
mm,
and then just try and play it really slowly with your eyes closed for security. Because if you can feel through the piece without really looking, then you know that you're quite safe. But I
yeah,
think it's almost like with piano practicing methodologies, you have this huge toolbox of so many things that do work, and you
yeah,
might only need to do a couple of them to get the success you need. Whereas other pieces, you might have to do many of these things, or
right.
none at all, and you just kind of your brain figures it out. But I like you said, I would just practice certain measures. If like a piece of music was like a line, because the piece of music isn't all the same difficulty level, is it? So there'll be, if we say like it's a straight line, and then like the difficult sections are like the red highlight spots,
Yeah,
there might be three or four in there.
yeah,
Leave the rest of the piece alone, and when you go to the piece, you're like, okay, I'm going to go straight to that one. Hands alone, hands together, slow practice, odd rhythms, eyes closed, possibly anything. You bring out the toolbox and use the practice methods you've learned to overcome those, and then you start putting the piece together. I think the main issue is people get to those red highlight points where it's difficult. They play through, and then they get to those points and then just stop, and then play again from the beginning, and then
hmm
or track through it and not really get there. Do you find that a lot
yeah,
with students?
yeah. It's usually practicing too big a segments. So in other words, start at the beginning and sort of just keep playing, and then mistakes are made, and then oh, okay, I better go back to the beginning and try it again. And by the time they're done, they've only done a couple repetitions, which is very bad. So it's a waste of rehearsal in that they've only done a few repetitions, and it was all done haphazardly. When I consider a correct repetition, I'm considering you know not just the notes, but the rhythms are correct. The tempo is, even if it's a practice tempo, are you able to do it in tempo? Are you using consistent fingering? Those are the sorts of things and the only way to get those correct every time and get a large number of repetitions in is to do a smaller amount of music before you start putting it back together. But yeah, the tendency for
Yeah,
some reason, even for me, I've been practicing for years, and it's like this human tendency to just keep playing, even though you know you should stop and work on a specific thing.
I was literally going to say, like, because I'm not, I'm guilty of doing it as well, as I'm sure
Mm.
you are, where you just start from the beginning and you're like, oh, this is lovely. And then you
Yeah.
get to the bit you're stuck on. You kind of, maybe you get it, maybe you don't, and you just keep going and then you
Yes.
start again from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's in our human nature to just enjoy the luxury of, I know, playing nice things, and we don't want to do hard things, right? Even with
Right.
something as simple as piano playing. So you really have to have some self-discipline where you're like, I'm not allowed to. It's almost like you reward yourself. I'll play through it once I've worked on this issue and really thought about it for like 10, 15, whatever minutes. And then once I've got it better or fixed it, then I'll play through to that point, as
Yeah.
opposed to just giving yourself the reward of playing through it straight away. I
Yeah.
say most of my time playing now, when I'm learning a new piece, is just working on the tough spots,
Yes.
and then once they're kind of resolved, you can put it together really easily. If
Mm.
you do the method where you play from the beginning and then you get stuck on the hard bit, like you said, you maybe get to it only a handful of times,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, I've been practicing for 2 hours and I've been like
Mm.
really working on it, but how many of those 2 hours did you really get to that? You probably could have spent half an hour just doing that alone and got a lot more out of it than doing 2 hours of just
Yes.
playing. You know.
Absolutely. One of the, I don't know if you call it a rule, but one of the guidelines I give my students is, about 5 to 10% of the time you spend on a piece should be the run throughs. So, and maybe even less than 5%. And then, 90 to 95% of the time is spent on very specific sections. So run throughs are important, but it's more of a gauge at maybe the beginning and the end to kind of see what you remembered from the day before, and also to say, okay, I really need to work on this section. But then, so basically, the thing about learning piano or anything that requires repetition, it's not so much the music that's hard, it's learning the discipline to practice, in an efficient way. I think that took me longer than learning the pieces.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you said, the run throughs, they're important because you can isolate those areas that are tricky and perfect them.
Right.
But then when you put them together, still pause, you still have hesitation. So you have to practice that connection as well. So
Yep.
you practice perfect that like measure, but then you also have to practice connecting it to the rest of or the phrase before or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And like you say, like once get an idea of where you are.
Right. And for practical purposes for my students, and whoever may come across this video, one of the ways that I deal with the connective thing is, for example, if I'm running a 2 measure segment and then I know I'm going to run the next 2 measures, what I'll do is I'll do 2 measures plus one note. So with a metronome. So what ends up happening is you practice the connection while you're practicing the initial segment. And then when you go to connect it later, you don't have to run that you don't have to redo it basically.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen like practice methods where you start with the phrase and then you slowly like build with join it together like note by
Yeah.
note, kind of on each side, and then once you get to maybe a phrase on each side, you're kind of like set, and
Yeah.
then you can also function that to however small or large you want to be. And the nice thing is that it's all relative. So the way you practice now is the same way you should be practicing when you first start out. It's just however you can manage it. So some person might have to work on just half a measure
Yeah.
and isolate that half measure, or it might be like isolating half the page.
Right.
But it's the same principle, just on a smaller or larger scale.
Right. Um, you mentioned scales earlier, and I think I know the answer, but what how would you say scales play a role in the mastery of piano or any instrument?
I think scales and arpeggios are kind of essential at the beginning because they kind of build your very basic foundations of technique and your mapping, your geography of the keyboard. And even when you're competent, I was even speaking to my university teacher who last year during my foundation year of at my university, we went through the grade 8 ABRSM syllabus, and he looked at the scales and he had to admit that even him, who can play things fine, was having to think about some of the scales because if you don't practice them, you just don't get good at them.
Hmm.
And I think that those do set the foundations very much so, and like the kind of like that entry. You can get away with learning the piano without them, but if you start with them, they give you that very solid foundation. And that's why I think a lot of people argue as well that it's a good idea to start classically trained just because of the technical difficulties that you have to overcome, and it kind of gears you towards difficulties in other music. You're a lot more familiar with the patterns and how it feels in your hand. It's not as hard. And I still, even now that I'm done with like the grade 8 ABRSM, I still start the practice sessions with scales of some kind. I have like a random name, like hat generator app on my phone, and it will just pick one of them. It would be like B major, B minor, and then you do them legato, staccato, and then you can still focus on those. So you can start with like whatever 88 BPM is like the minimum requirement on the grade 8 ABRSM, and then you can work on getting them to like 100, 120. Like my goal is to try and get them all above 120 to maybe like 140 on some of them, just because it gives you something to do during the warm up. It's like I'm not just practicing mindlessly; I'm still trying to get better at it.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you agree with well, the scales?
Oh, absolutely. I started them from a young age. I don't know how far in I was before I actually started, but and you were talking about how being classically trained can help you pretty much with all other music, and I would find that to be very true. I didn't realize at the time when I was starting to make connections a couple years in where it was like, okay, I can play these chords now, but what pattern do I use? And I didn't make the connection at the time, but really I was pulling from Mozart, or I was pulling from composers that were doing particular voicings and patterns, and I was using those patterns in modern music. And the scale, for practical chord theory purposes, as easy as modern music can be to play, having that foundation of the scale has helped me on a theory level and an ear training level. It's all an interconnected thing. And so in college, when I was kind of focused on music theory and ear training, that knowledge of scales really came through because it's essentially like learning the alphabet to a language. You don't start learning a language and then learn the alphabet later, and so you shouldn't do the same thing with music.
Yeah, I think Chopin. I don't know the direct quote, but he was very much for learning your scales and arpeggios, but not really so much after that. So once you have you're fluent in all scales and arpeggios and all the keys, that should be enough to build your foundations for most technical difficulties. And then a lot of technical difficulties you can just overcome by playing the pieces that have them. So I'm not really a fan of Hanon, to be honest.
I see. Yeah.
Just the way they're done, though. So there's nothing wrong with Hanon, but I think it's the way it's taught, like to isolate your fingers and be extremely mechanical. The way pianos are now, they're a lot heavier, and they require more arm weight. If you're doing them, you kind of have to move your hands to support your fingers, as opposed to just trying to isolate them like spider fingers.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it says on hand is like keep your each finger raised as high as you can and
Mm.
practice the ball for like play through the whole book before you start doing anything. No one's got time for that.
Oh yeah, I never made it. I mean, I don't have a particular sway on Hannon, but I do. I spend most of my time looking in the back of the book because there's such things as dominant seven arpeggios that I find
Yeah,
particularly fun, and also some octave work that is very applicable to what I do with modern music because I end up playing a lot of octave stuff and jumps and different things like that. So I really dig that, but I never made it through, maybe even 30 of the lessons growing up.
yeah. No, I agree with you on that one as well. It's you find the technical difficulties you're on, like I don't
Yeah,
know, if you were playing something with thirds and then you were struggling, you could go to the Hammond book and find the
right.
exercise for thirds and be very direct about it.
Yeah,
Smarter approach than to start with exercise 1 through to 20 or whatever it is, and
yeah.
not much.
It's, I remember working on trills, and so I would consult, Hannon, like a specific exercise. Like if I needed to do a trill with four and five, then I would work
Yeah,
those particular exercises.
that's
But
sort of thing. Like with trails of most kinds, 4/5 is fine. Sorry, 3/4 is fine on my right hand.
yeah,
5/4 is okay, but I've never had to do it. But then on my left hand, 3 and 4 trill is really quite difficult. But there's
mm,
nothing that's come up where I've had to do it.
yeah,
But if there was, I would imagine that I would isolate the bar and make an exercise of it. And also, if I was really struggling, then I would go to something like Hanon and find the exercise for it. But yeah,
but at the end of the day, you're right. Even with the trill, for example, if it's mapped to a specific beat, you could really sufficient enough would be to just slow down the metronome until you can play it perfectly, and then do tons of repetition, speeding it up in increments until you get to the desired tempo. I mean, that would do just as good, I would think.
yeah.
So,
Just to add to these like ideas, I think because a lot of people believe as well that most technique is really just in your mind. So once you've got, you've built your fingers up through playing, a lot of the technical difficulties are just the way you're negotiating it in your mind as opposed to fixing it with an exercise. It's kind of the way you
mm,
um, thinking about it. So it's almost like a more, I don't even know how you'd say it, but a more theoretical approach to technique and
mm,
spending more time thinking about it and then doing it once right. Like, I think some people, like Glenn Gould and stuff, wouldn't really practice the pieces that much.
mm,
I think he said he would just analyze the scores more often and think it through in his mind
mm.
as opposed to practicing physically. And I think there
Yeah,
is a good point to that where you get fixated on fixing it physically and you kind of going through you're doing everything right, but it's just not working.
yeah.
It could just be the way you're subconsciously tensing in your mind because you're thinking this is the hard bit, and then you just get tense.
I I definitely agree with that. There's this book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and in it talks about I don't know if it's the same guy you were referring to, but it talked about a world-renowned piano player who essentially practices every piece to perfection in his mind and then touches the piano. And I think one of the benefits is that if I practice in my mind, I can practice it perfectly easier because I don't have the physical limitations, of mind and body. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it, for sure.
Yeah, people have people recommend doing the whole practicing away from your instrument when you just read the score and imagine yourself doing it in your mind
Yeah.
for memory, the technical issues as well, and with high success. I think I don't have that much experience on that, but I have done it in the past. Just through the piece before performing it or something, and just imagining what it looks like and feels like. It's an interesting sensation.
Yeah, I had this idea to do a similar thing as the progress video, but do it practicing in my mind, and then just until I had it perfect, and then just trying to play it. The problem with doing a progress video would be, people don't want to watch me practice in my mind, so it would probably be more or less like, this is when I started thinking it through in my mind, and then this is when I think I have it done, and then how perfect does it come out the first time I ever play it? So I thought about doing something like that, just to, because I don't know either way. I don't have a lot of experience with it.
It's the same thing with something like sight reading as well, you know. So I've been, you know, I feel like for my progress, my technical ability was here. Like I had the ability to do a lot of these things, but everything else was so low. So the RSM exam kind of helped me bring everything to the same level, which I'm grateful I did. But things like sight reading, you get used to, you know, trying not to look at your hands, counting and everything, but it just doesn't click. Well, before you even look at the music scan, are there any accidentals, what key signature are we in? You're almost trying to play it in your mind before so sight reading doesn't actually have to be like sit down and then just start playing. You have a few moments to scan.
Yeah.
And get an idea. So if you can figure out the rhythm and you can feel the rhythm, you can hear the rhythm in your head, or you're lucky, hear what it sounds like, then you've already done like half the job. So that when you start sight reading, you know, it's kind of like cheating.
Yeah.
But like in the best possible way for something like sight reading. So you're whirling around in your mind before you even start placing your hands on the keyboard. And I found that recently, scanning the lines of music that I'm about to sight read really helps just bring up the success rate of doing it the first try, or as close to it as possible.
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, that's never been my strongest point, but it's certainly something I've had to do with accompanying for other people. So it's definitely recommended that you try to accompany, you know, as many people as possible, because it really does put you on the spot and make you a better player for sure.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get into a bit of that, because it's easy to start when you're practicing sight reading on your own. If you've got someone with you, then you just have to keep going no matter what.
Yes.
And build that skill.
Yeah. So, what do you see yourself doing? I know you're studying now, but eventually, you know, you'll be in profession. So what do you see yourself doing with piano long term?
Well, I think even when I was considering applying to uni for it, I wasn't, because at that stage I didn't really know the trajectory of how good I might be able to get, but I knew that anything to do with studying music I would enjoy. So even if I was just studying it academically, and I got to basically do my university degree on something to do with music that I could kind of choose that I was interested in, I'd be happy. But as I started to improve, my ideas became quite narrow. Now I do want to do something more to do with like playing performance, but not so much trying to be like a concert pianist or anything like that. Along the way that, like we're talking about, like piano pedagogy, methodologies, like really mastering the art of practicing and playing the instrument as efficiently as possible and teaching that. So because I've been kind of doing teaching jobs my whole life with, you know, fitness coaching as well, I do really enjoy that. And I would love to kind of teach at that university level, do something like be a piano professor, or teach university students like piano, the up and coming people with the efficient practicing techniques. And I think because of the way I learned, it was obviously a lot of things going my way, of course, but it was a lot of
Mm.
attention to those small details.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part and making them, sharing that with as many players as possible is invaluable. So I think teaching of some kind will be what I'd like to do, such as yourself. And you do the occasional performances or accompanying here and there. Who knows? But right now, I really see myself trying to get into piano pedagogy, trying to be a professor or teaching at a university level. Maybe not as a doctor, but teaching piano at like a university level. That higher kind of level of practice where it's more to do with the very fine details as opposed to teaching the very basics.
I see. Well, those all sound like very great goals. I'd really hope to follow you on YouTube, and I'm going to share as much as I can with my students on your progress and success. And I want to just thank you for taking the time today, and maybe we can do a follow up sometime. It seems like we have a lot of the same viewpoints, and I'm really interested in the psychology of it. So maybe we can talk about that at a later time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really nice to speak to you, Ryan. Thanks for having me, and I think the conversation was very interesting.
All right. Well, we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. I hope it has been helpful. A lot of viewpoints on practice methodology, a lot of viewpoints on how to get the most out of your time when you're practicing, because especially as working adults, we just don't have a lot of it. But what do you do with that precious little time that you have to get the most out of rehearsal? If you have any questions, please get a hold of me. We will talk to you soon. Thank you very much.